He thought a termination letter could end everything. But the moment I signed those exit papers, he didn't realize he'd just armed the bomb that would destroy his entire company. That arrogant smirk, that reckless decision. And me, holding the weapon they never suspected existed, the source code running their empire. It was mine, the authentication system keeping their doors open. My creation. As I walked out with my cardboard box at 3:30 p.m., I knew they had exactly 72 hours before everything went dark. My name is Madeline Ross, and I'd given Vexton Dynamics 12 years of my life, 12 years of debugging code at 3 in the morning, 12 years of canceled vacations to fix critical systems, 12 years of building the infrastructure that kept this company breathing. But none of that mattered on that Tuesday afternoon when Ethan Drake, our new engineering manager, who'd been with us all of 6 weeks, decided to make an example of me. The conference room felt smaller than usual. The late afternoon sun slanted through the blinds, casting harsh lines across the polished table where I'd presented countless solutions, saved countless projects. Now I sat there, hands folded, watching Ethan's theatrical performance for the benefit of the junior developers he'd summoned as witnesses. "Madeline, we're restructuring the department for optimal efficiency," he announced, his Stanford MBA practically gleaming from his perfectly white teeth. He'd come from McKenna Consulting, one of those firms that specialized in transforming companies by firing the people who actually knew how things worked. "Your position has been eliminated, effective immediately." The younger engineers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Sarah from the front-end team wouldn't meet my eyes. Marcus, who I'd mentored through his first year, stared at his laptop screen. They all knew this was wrong, but they also knew their mortgages depended on staying silent. "I see," I said, my voice steady as granite. "And the lock-key authentication system? The security protocols? The encrypted database architecture?" Ethan waved his hand dismissively, a gesture I'd seen him practice in his glass office when he thought no one was watching. "We have full documentation. The team can handle it." Documentation. I almost laughed. The documentation they had was what I'd chosen to share. The surface layer. The user manual. They didn't have the architecture decisions. The undocumented fixes. The mental map of a system I'd built from scratch during my freelance days before Vexton had begged me to bring it in-house. "HR has prepared your exit package," Ethan continued, sliding a folder across the table with the kind of precision that suggested he'd rehearsed this moment. "It's quite generous, considering the circumstances." Considering the circumstances, there were no circumstances beyond his need to establish dominance, to show the team he could remove anyone, even someone who'd been here since before the company went public. I recognized the tactic from every mediocre manager who'd ever mistaken fear for respect. Helen from HR, a nervous woman who'd joined just 3 months ago, fumbled with her tablet. "We'll need your badge, your laptop, and your company phone. Security will escort you to your desk to collect your personal items." Security? After 12 years, I needed security to watch me pack a cardboard box. Tommy, the security guard who I'd shared coffee with every morning for a decade, looked apologetic as he stood by the door. His shoulders were tense, uncomfortable with this duty. I stood slowly, maintaining eye contact with Ethan. He wanted me to break, to plead, to rage. Instead, I unbadged myself with deliberate calm, placing the plastic card on the table with a soft click. My laptop followed, then the phone, each item laid down like a card in a game he didn't know we were playing. "The transition will be seamless," Ethan announced to the room, already dismissing me from his attention. "We've already identified candidates for the senior architect position, someone who understands modern development paradigms." Modern development paradigms. This from a man who'd asked me last week what GitHub was. As I walked to my desk with Tommy beside me, the office felt different. The familiar hum of keyboards, the soft arguing about tabs versus spaces, the smell of burnt coffee from the kitchen, it all felt distant, like looking at my life through frosted glass. Colleagues averted their eyes, some from shame, some from fear that termination might be contagious. I packed methodically. The succulent my daughter had given me, the photo from the company's IPO day, the stress ball shaped like a server that had gotten me through countless deployments. I left the programming books, the conference swag, the certificates of appreciation. Those belonged to someone who worked here. "I'm sorry, Maddie," Tommy whispered as we reached the elevator. "This ain't right." "It's not your fault, Tommy," I said, managing a genuine smile for him. "Take care of yourself." As the elevator descended, I thought about the contract gathering dust in my filing cabinet at home. The original licensing agreement for LockKey Solutions, the one that specified the terms under which Vexton could use my authentication system, the one with the clause that everyone had forgotten about, buried in subsection 7.3.2. License remains valid only while the original developer maintains active employment status with the licensee organization. Ethan Drake thought he'd just shown his power. In 72 hours, when the license validation check ran its monthly cycle, he'd learn what real power looked like. Not the kind that came from a title or a corner office, but the kind that came from understanding how things actually worked. The lobby's marble floors echoed under my feet as I walked toward the exit. Behind me, 30 floors up, Ethan was probably already celebrating his decisive leadership. He had no idea he'd just triggered the countdown to his own professional destruction. The drive home felt surreal, my hands steady on the wheel of my Accord. The same car I'd driven to Vexton for 12 years, navigating the familiar route on autopilot while my mind wandered through memories. The radio played some pop song about revenge, and I turned it off. I didn't need a soundtrack for what was coming. Traffic crawled through downtown, giving me time to think. 12 years, 4,380 days, give or take. I remembered my first day. Walking into that startup office above the Vietnamese restaurant, just 22 years old with a laptop and more ambition than sense. Back then, Vexton Dynamics was just 15 people with a dream of revolutionizing supply chain software. I'd been their first real engineer, not a founder, but the one who turned their napkin sketches into actual code, the one who stayed until 4 in the morning debugging memory leaks, the one who missed her college roommate's wedding because the payment system crashed on Black Friday, the one who built the security infrastructure from scratch when we got our first enterprise client. But the memory that mattered most happened 2 years before I officially joined Vexton. I was freelancing then, building custom authentication systems for companies too small to afford enterprise solutions. LockKey Solutions was my masterpiece, a lightweight, elegant system that could scale from startup to enterprise without breaking a sweat. It was beautiful code, the kind you write when you're young and obsessed and don't know what impossible means. David Vexton himself had found me through a tech blog post I'd written about authentication architecture. We met at a coffee shop in Palo Alto, and he'd offered to buy LockKey outright. I was broke, eating ramen twice a day, but something made me hesitate. Instead, I'd proposed a licensing deal. They could use LockKey exclusively, but I retained ownership. In exchange, they'd hire me full-time with a senior engineer salary. David had laughed, called me shrewd for someone so young. We'd hammered out the contract right there, on coffee-stained napkins that his lawyer would later translate into proper legalese. The key clause, the one about employment status, had been my insurance policy. "What if you fire me someday?" I'd asked. David had promised that would never happen, but David had retired 5 years ago, and promises, I'd learned, rarely survived leadership changes. I pulled into my garage at 6:20 p.m., the automatic door closing behind me with finality. The house was quiet. My daughter was at college now. My ex-husband remarried and living in Seattle. Just me and the cat, Professor Whiskers, who meowed accusingly about his delayed dinner. After feeding the cat, I made myself tea, chamomile, because caffeine seemed unnecessary for what was essentially a waiting game. My home office was exactly as I'd left it that morning, before I knew my life would change. 3 monitors, mechanical keyboard, the standing desk I'd bought during the pandemic, but it was the filing cabinet in the corner that drew my attention. The contract was in a folder labeled LockKey Original in my obsessively organized system, 23 pages of dense legal text, but I only needed page 16, section 7.3.2, innocuously titled Terms of Continued Use. I read it again, though I knew it by heart. The license granted herein shall remain in effect so long as the following conditions are met. A. Annual license fee payment as specified in Schedule A. B. Compliance with security audits as outlined in Section 5. And C. The original developer, Madeline Ross, maintains active employment status with the licensee organization. Upon termination of any condition, the license shall expire after the next validation cycle. Validation cycle. Every 30 days. Lockheed phoned home to verify its license status. A simple check against a secure server I still controlled, confirming that all conditions were met. The next cycle was in 70 hours and counting. I opened my laptop and logged into the Lockheed admin panel. Everything showed green. Active licenses. 1. Organization. Vexton Dynamics. Status. Valid. Expiration. Pending next validation. They hadn't updated their HR system yet. I was technically still an employee until end of business day, which meant the license was still valid. When HR processed my termination tomorrow morning, they'd update their internal systems, mark my employee ID as inactive, close my email account. They'd think they'd severed all ties cleanly. They had no idea that their entire authentication infrastructure, every login, every secure transaction, every piece of encrypted data, was about to become inaccessible, not deleted, not destroyed, just locked, like changing the locks on a house while everyone was still inside. I pulled up Vexton's architecture documentation on my personal copies. Yes, I'd kept copies, as any sensible engineer would. Lockheed wasn't just handling employee logins. Over the years, they'd integrated it into everything: customer portals, payment processing, internal communications, even the HVAC system somehow. It was the digital skeleton key for the entire operation. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Maddie, I'm so sorry about today. That was fucked up." I didn't reply. There would be time for conversations later, after they understood what they'd lost. Instead, I opened my journal and wrote, Day 0. They think they've ended something. They've only just begun it. The cat jumped onto my lap, purring obliviously. Outside, suburban life continued as normal. But in 70 hours, Vexton Dynamics would learn why you should never fire the person who holds the keys to your kingdom, especially when that person wrote the lock. The next morning arrived with unusual tranquility. No alarm at 5:30 a.m., no rush to beat traffic, no mental preparation for whatever fire needed fighting. I made French press coffee instead of grabbing a cup from the drive-thru. I read an actual newspaper instead of skimming headlines on my phone during a stand-up meeting. Professor Whiskers sprawled across the sunny spot on the kitchen table, and I didn't shoo him away. By 9 a.m., I'd settled into my home office with a second cup of coffee and my personal laptop. The Lockheed admin panel remained open on one monitor. A steady pulse of green status indicators. The license was still active. HR was taking their time processing my termination. Typical Vexton efficiency. I opened another tab and checked Vexton's status page. The public-facing dashboard that showed system health to customers, all green. All systems operational, it declared with confidence. I took a screenshot for posterity. My phone sat silent on the desk. No Slack notifications, no email alerts, no calendar reminders. After 12 years of constant digital noise, the silence felt like meditation. I'd disabled my work account's ability to forward to personal addresses years ago, a boundary I'd maintained despite pressure. Now that boundary served a different purpose. Complete disconnection. I pulled up my personal project folder. Code I'd been meaning to review for months but never had time for. An improved encryption algorithm. A better way to handle distributed authentication. Ideas that had come to me during those 4 debugging sessions, but had nowhere to go within Vexton's rigid architecture. Now I had all the time in the world. At 11:15 a.m., the first sign appeared, not on my phone or email, but on Twitter. A Vexton customer complaining about intermittent login issues. Anyone else having trouble with @Vexton Dynamics portal? Getting weird timeout errors? #frustrated. Interesting, the validation cycle wasn't due for another 58 hours, but systems were already showing stress. I pulled up the architecture diagram again. Of course, the authentication tokens. While the main license wouldn't expire until the validation cycle, the temporary tokens had shorter lifespans, 24-hour maximums for security. As tokens expired and systems tried to generate new ones, they'd start hitting edge cases in the code. I'd warned them about this 2 years ago. The token refresh mechanism needed redundancy, failover capabilities, but that would have required additional investment, and Ethan's predecessor had decided it wasn't a priority. "It's working fine," he'd said. "Don't fix what isn't broken." Another tweet popped up, then another. The complaints were multiplying, but still manageable. Customer service was probably fielding calls, telling people to clear their cookies, try another browser, the usual first-line defense tactics. Some users would get through on retry, others wouldn't. The pattern would seem random, inexplicable. I made myself a salad for lunch, taking time to properly compose it instead of throwing together whatever was quick. Arugula, cherry tomatoes, grilled chicken left over from yesterday, a homemade vinaigrette. I ate on the back patio, watching the birds at the feeder, feeling the sun on my face. It was a beautiful day to not be in a windowless conference room. By 2 p.m., the admin panel showed something interesting. Failed authentication attempts were spiking. Not enough to trigger alarms. Vexton's monitoring was configured for catastrophic failures, not gradual degradation, but the pattern was clear if you knew what to look for. Systems were struggling to validate user sessions. The refresh mechanism was failing more often than succeeding. My personal phone, the one I'd had before Vexton issued their device, buzzed with a text from Sarah. The front-end developer. She'd grabbed my personal number at last year's Christmas party, when we'd shared an Uber home. "Maddie, weird stuff happening with login system. Did you document the token refresh anywhere specific? Can't find it in the wiki." I looked at the message for a long moment. Sarah was a good engineer, smart and dedicated. She'd figure it out eventually, but eventually wasn't going to help her today. I set the phone aside without responding. The Lockheed admin panel had a beautiful feature I'd built in the early days. A real-time visualization of authentication flows. Normally, it looked like a constellation. Points of light connecting and disconnecting in elegant patterns. Now it was starting to look more like a thunderstorm. Clusters of red indicating failed attempts. Yellow warnings spreading like infection through the network. 3 p.m. brought an escalation. The Vexton status page updated. Investigating. We are investigating reports of intermittent authentication issues. Most users are not affected. Most users, the language of technical minimization. I'd written similar updates myself, trying to keep customers calm while systems burned behind the scenes. Most users meant they had no idea of the scope. Investigating meant they hadn't found the root cause. Intermittent meant they couldn't reproduce it on demand. I opened my journal and wrote, Day 1. The cracks begin to show. They search for answers in documentation that was never complete, in knowledge that walked out the door with me. The elegant machine I built continues to run, but without its architect, they cannot comprehend why it's failing. Professor Whiskers jumped onto the desk, walking across the keyboard with feline disregard for technology. I scratched behind his ears and watched the storm build on my monitor. In 55 hours, it would make landfall. I spent the rest of the afternoon working on my own code, occasionally glancing at the admin panel. By 6 p.m., the constellation had more red than green. Somewhere in Vexton's offices, engineers were scrambling, managers were demanding updates, and Ethan Drake was learning that modern development paradigms were worthless when you couldn't log in to implement them. I made myself a proper dinner, pan-seared salmon with asparagus, a glass of wine, no rushed takeout eaten at my desk, no protein bar substituting for a meal. As night fell, I sat on my couch with a book, an actual paper book, while 30 miles away. The night shift arrived at Vexton to find chaos waiting for them. The silence of my phone was the most beautiful sound I'd heard in years. Day 2 began with my phone buzzing at 6:45 a.m. Not my old work phone, that was sitting in Vexton's IT department, but my personal one. The caller ID showed Marcus. I let it go to voicemail. Maddie, it's Marcus. Look, I know you're probably pissed, and you have every right to be, but we're in deep shit here. Nobody can figure out what's wrong with the auth system. Can you at least point us in the right direction? Call me back, please. I deleted the voicemail and went back to my coffee. By 8 a.m., the messages were multiplying. 3 more calls from Marcus, 2 from Sarah, 1 from someone in DevOps whose number I didn't recognize, 14 text messages ranging from apologetic to desperate. I turned off read receipts and set my phone to silent. The real entertainment was on LinkedIn. Vexton employees were posting carefully worded messages about technical challenges and system optimization, the kind of corporate speak that meant everything was on fire, but nobody wanted to admit it publicly. One post from a sales director caught my eye. "Exciting times as we upgrade our infrastructure for better customer experience. Bear with us during this transition." Transition, that was one word for it. I opened my laptop and checked the admin panel. The situation had deteriorated overnight. What started as intermittent failures had cascaded into systematic breakdowns. The authentication service was still running, it hadn't crashed, but it was refusing more requests than it accepted, like a bouncer at an exclusive club who'd lost the guest list and was turning everyone away just to be safe. An email notification popped up on my personal account. Someone had forwarded me a thread from Vexton's internal communications. It was Sarah, using her personal Gmail. "Maddie, thought you should see this. It's gotten bad." The thread was a disaster. 23 engineers all talking past each other, proposing theories that ranged from DNS issues to a coordinated cyber attack. Someone suggested rolling back to a previous version, but they couldn't access the deployment system. Another proposed rebuilding the authentication service from scratch, which would take weeks they didn't have. And there, buried in the middle, was Ethan's contribution. "This is unacceptable. I want solutions, not excuses. We have the documentation. Figure it out." We have the documentation. I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. By noon, the situation had leaked beyond corporate speak. TechCrunch had picked up the story. Vexton Dynamics experiencing major outage. Customers locked out. The article quoted anonymous employees describing chaos and complete system failure. Vexton's stock price had dropped 12% in pre-market trading. My neighbor knocked on my door around 1 p.m., holding a package that had been misdelivered. "Not working today, Maddie?" she asked, noting my casual attire. "I'm between projects," I said with a smile. "Must be nice to take a break," she replied. "My husband's been up all night. He works at some tech company downtown. Says they're having massive computer problems." "That sounds stressful," I said sympathetically. After she left, I made myself lunch and sat in my garden. The roses I'd neglected for years were overdue for pruning. I got my gardening gloves and spent the afternoon tending to them, occasionally checking my phone for updates. The Slack channel Sarah had forwarded was descending into panic. They'd tried everything: rebooting servers, clearing caches, even attempting to bypass the authentication system entirely. But Lockkey was too deeply integrated. It was like trying to remove your skeleton while keeping your body functional. At 3:30 p.m., a new message appeared in the thread. This one from the CEO, Jennifer Walsh. "All hands meeting at 4 p.m., mandatory attendance, including remote employees." I wondered what Jennifer would say. She'd been CEO for 3 years, brought in by the board to maximize shareholder value. She'd probably never looked at the Lockkey contract. CEOs rarely concern themselves with infrastructure details until those details brought everything crashing down. My phone rang again. This time it was a number I recognized but hadn't seen in years. David Vexton, the founder. I debated for a moment, then answered. "Madeline," his voice was tired. "I heard what happened, both what Ethan did and what's happening now." "Hello, David?" "I'm not calling to ask you to fix it," he said quickly. "I know the terms of our original agreement. I'm calling to apologize. I promised you'd always have a home at Vexton, and the company broke that promise." "The company changed," I said simply. "Yes, it did." He paused. "You know they're going to come begging soon." "I know. And you know what you're going to ask for?" "I have some ideas." David laughed, the same laugh from that coffee shop 13 years ago. "Still shrewd. Good. Make them pay. Madeline, and when this is over, if you want to build something new, call me. I'm retired, but I'm also bored." After he hung up, I felt something shift. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about value, about making them understand what they'd thrown away. By 5 p.m., Twitter was brutal. #Vexton down was trending. Customers were sharing screenshots of error messages, lost work, inaccessible data. One enterprise client publicly announced they were considering legal action for breach of contract. The stock had dropped 23%. As evening fell, I sat on my porch with a glass of wine and my laptop. The admin panel showed a system in complete collapse. In 36 hours, the validation cycle would run, the license would officially expire, and even the pretense of functionality would disappear. But they'd come calling before then. They had to. The only question was, who would make the call and what they'd be willing to offer. I raised my glass to the sunset. To knowing your worth. I toasted to no one in particular. My phone buzzed with another message. This time it was from Jennifer Walsh herself. Ms. Ross, we need to talk, please. Not yet. I thought, let them marinate in the consequences a little longer. Let Ethan explain to the board how his power play had cost them millions. Let them all understand that some things can't be fixed with modern development paradigms. The roses looked beautiful in the dying light, finally getting the attention they deserved. The third morning arrived with an apocalyptic sunrise. Fitting. Considering what was happening 30 miles away at Vexton's headquarters, I'd actually slept well. The kind of deep sleep that comes from having absolutely nothing to worry about. Professor Whiskers had curled up on my feet, and I woke naturally at 7 a.m. No alarm required. My phone, left charging in the kitchen, showed 47 missed calls. The breakdown: Jennifer Walsh, 9. Ethan Drake, 15. Various engineers, 20. And 3 from numbers I didn't recognize that were probably board members. The voicemail box was full. I made breakfast, proper scrambled eggs, sourdough toast, fresh orange juice, and opened my laptop. The news was everywhere now. The Wall Street Journal. Vexton Dynamics stock plummets as technical crisis enters third day. Forbes. How a software giant became paralyzed overnight. Even the local news had picked it up. Bay Area tech company leaves thousands of businesses stranded. The admin panel told the real story. Complete system failure. Not a single successful authentication in the past 6 hours. The constellation visualization was entirely red now. A crimson galaxy of failed connections. In 24 hours, the license validation would run, and even attempting to restart the system would become impossible. I checked Vexton's status page. They'd given up on minimization. Major outage. We are experiencing a critical system failure affecting all services. Our engineering team is working around the clock to resolve this issue. We apologize for the severe disruption to your business. Severe disruption. That was an understatement. According to Twitter, 3 major retail chains couldn't process transactions. A healthcare network couldn't access patient records. A logistics company had trucks sitting idle because drivers couldn't log into their route systems. My personal email dinged with a message from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line: Urgent. Board authorization for negotiation. I opened it. It was from Richard Blackstone, chairman of Vexton's board of directors. Ms. Ross, the board has authorized me to reach out directly. We understand the situation regarding the Lockheed licensing agreement. We are prepared to discuss terms for immediate reinstatement of services. Please contact me at your earliest convenience. Time is of the essence. Richard Blackstone. Time is of the essence. Now they understood time. For 12 years, my time had belonged to them. Every weekend, every vacation, every family dinner interrupted by production issues. But when it came time to value that dedication, they'd given me less than an hour to pack my desk. I composed a brief reply. Mr. Blackstone, I am aware of the situation. I will be available for discussion at 2 p.m. today, not before. Ross. After sending it, I went for a walk. The neighborhood was peaceful. Suburban California at its finest. Kids were in school, adults at work, or trying to work. If they were Vexton customers, Mrs. Patterson was walking her ancient retriever, and we chatted about the weather, her grandchildren, anything but authentication systems and corporate collapse. When I returned home at 10:30 a.m., my phone was ringing continuously. I let it ring. They could wait. They'd made me wait. Standing in that conference room while Ethan performed his little power play, they could experience a fraction of that helplessness. The LinkedIn posts from Vexton employees had shifted tone. Gone was the corporate optimism. Now they were sharing open-to-work banners and updating resumes. The rats were preparing to flee the sinking ship. Sarah texted me from her personal number. Maddie, 3 clients just terminated their contracts. Legal says we're looking at hundreds of millions in liability. The entire engineering team is talking about walking out. Ethan locked himself in his office and won't come out. Ethan locked in his office. The man who'd wanted to demonstrate his authority was now hiding from the consequences. I wondered if he was updating his resume too, though I doubted McKenna Consulting would want him back after this spectacular failure. At noon, something interesting happened. The admin panel showed a spike in activity. Someone was trying to brute force the system. They were attempting to override the license check, probably by modifying the code directly. Ambitious, but futile. I'd built LockKey with cryptographic signatures at every level. Without the private key, which resided on my personal server, any modification would be rejected. I made myself a light lunch and settled into my home office. At exactly 2 p.m., I called Richard Blackstone. He answered on the first ring. Ms. Ross, thank you for responding. I'll be direct. We need LockKey restored immediately. What are your terms? Before we discuss terms, I said calmly, I need to understand something. Are you familiar with the original licensing agreement? I've been briefed. The license is tied to your employment status. And are you aware of why my employment was terminated? A pause. I've been informed it was part of a departmental restructuring. I laughed. Mr. Blackstone, let's not insult each other's intelligence. Ethan Drake terminated me to establish dominance over the engineering team. There was no restructuring, no redundancy, no performance issue. It was ego, pure and simple. I see. His voice was carefully neutral. That context is helpful. Good. Now, my terms. First, I want a public apology from Ethan Drake, acknowledging that my termination was unjustified and detrimental to the company. Ms. Ross? Second, I continued, a new contract for LockKey Solutions, 5-year term, 3 times the current licensing fee, with annual increases tied to inflation. That's third, a consultant position for myself, not employment. I won't be anyone's employee again. 6-month term, $750 per hour, to oversee the transition and document the system properly. Ms. Ross, these terms are non-negotiable, I finished. You have 1 hour to decide. After that, I'll be unavailable until Monday. By then, the validation cycle will have run, and restoration will take significantly longer. Days, possibly weeks. This is extortion. No, Mr. Blackstone. Extortion would be if I caused this problem. I didn't. Vexton caused it by terminating my employment without understanding the consequences. I'm simply offering to solve your self-inflicted crisis at market rates for emergency consulting. Silence stretched between us. Finally, he spoke. I need to consult with the board. You have 58 minutes, I said and hung up. The house felt different now, charged with possibility. This wasn't just about making them pay anymore. It was about setting terms for a new relationship, one where my expertise was valued appropriately. My phone buzzed with a text from David Vexton. Heard you gave them terms? Good. Don't budge an inch. At 2:45 p.m., with 15 minutes left on my deadline, Richard called back. We accept your terms, he said, his voice tired. Legal will send the contracts within the hour. Can you restore service as soon as they're signed? I can begin the restoration process immediately upon receipt of the signed documents and the public apology. The apology, he sighed. Ethan has agreed to post it on LinkedIn and the company blog. I'll be watching for it, I said. Oh, and Mr. Blackstone? Make sure HR processes my termination paperwork correctly. I want everything properly documented. That I was terminated without cause. Effective Tuesday at 5 p.m. Why does that matter now? Because, I said, looking at the admin panel showing total system failure. Details matter. Vexton forgot that. I haven't. After ending the call, I sat back in my chair. In a few hours, I'd restore their system, but things would never go back to how they were. The power dynamic had shifted permanently. Professor Whiskers jumped onto my lap, purring. Outside, the afternoon sun painted golden stripes across my garden. The roses I'd pruned yesterday were already looking healthier. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't destruction. It's making them understand exactly what they lost and exactly what it will cost to get it back. The call came at 4:12 p.m., but it wasn't from Richard Blackstone. The display showed Ethan Drake. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Mr. Drake? Madeline. His voice was hollow, stripped of the arrogance that had filled the conference room 3 days ago. We need to talk. I believe our business will be conducted through legal channels now. Please, the word came out cracked. Not about the contract. I need to say this directly. I said nothing, letting silence fill the space where his authority used to live. I fucked up, he continued, words tumbling out like a dam breaking. I came in thinking I could reshape everything, make my mark, prove to everyone that I deserved this position. I saw you as an obstacle, someone too embedded, too comfortable. I thought removing you would show strength. And how's that working out for you? A bitter laugh. The board wants my resignation. Jennifer made that clear an hour ago. Either I post the apology and resign, or they'll terminate me for cause and make sure everyone in Silicon Valley knows why. I felt no satisfaction, just a cold understanding. You destroyed 12 years of my career for a power play that lasted 3 days. I know. Christ, I know. The team won't even look at me. Sarah called me a LinkedIn MBA cliché to my face. Marcus said I'm the case study they'll teach at business school about executive incompetence. They're not wrong. No, they're not. He paused, and I heard what sounded like a chair creaking. The apology is already posted, LinkedIn, company blog, and Jennifer insisted on Twitter too. I named you specifically, acknowledged the termination was unjustified and driven by my ego. It's all there. I pulled up LinkedIn on my laptop. There it was, posted 2 minutes ago. A public apology to Madeline Ross and the Vexton community. 3 days ago, I made the worst decision of my professional career. I terminated Madeline Ross, a brilliant engineer who spent 12 years building the very foundations our company stands on. This decision wasn't based on performance, restructuring, or any legitimate business reason. It was driven by my own insecurity and need to assert authority I hadn't earned. The consequences of my actions have been catastrophic. Our systems have failed, our customers have suffered, and our reputation has been severely damaged. But more importantly, I destroyed the career of someone who deserved respect, not termination. Madeline Ross is not just a talented engineer, she is the engineer who made Vexton's success possible. Her authentication system, LockKey, isn't just code, it's the culmination of years of expertise, dedication, and innovation that I was too arrogant to recognize. I am resigning from my position effective immediately. To Madeline, I offer my deepest apologies. To our customers and employees, I take full responsibility for this crisis. The failure is mine alone. Ethan Drake. It's posted, I said. I know you probably think it's just words, just me trying to save face. I think, I interrupted, that you're experiencing consequences for the first time in your professional life. Silence. Then, you're right. At McKenna, we'd come in, make recommendations, collect our fees, and leave before seeing the real impact. This is different. This is reality. Yeah, another pause. For what it's worth, the board authorized everything you asked for, the contract, the consulting rate, everything. Richard said you could have asked for double and they'd have paid it. I didn't want to bankrupt them, just educate them. Mission accomplished. His voice turned curious. Did you know this would happen when you walked out? I knew the contract terms. I knew what would happen when the license expired. I didn't make it happen. You did. But you let it happen. Yes, I said simply. I let you face the consequences of your own decision. The team is calling you a legend. Someone started a Slack channel called WWMD. What would Madeline do? They're treating your old documentation like holy texts. Despite everything, I smiled. Tell them the documentation was always there. They just never needed to look until I was gone. I will, he cleared his throat. I'm cleaning out my office now, faster than 3 days. Ironically, no security escort for me. Everyone's too busy trying to fix what I broke. Where will you go? Not sure. My reputation is toxic now. This story will follow me forever. The executive who brought down Vexton Dynamics with one termination letter. He laughed bitterly. Maybe I'll teach. Use myself as a cautionary tale. That would be a first, learning from your mistakes. Harsh but fair, I heard shuffling. Probably him packing. Madeline, can I ask you something? Go ahead. Would you have helped if I just asked? That first day, if I'd come to you with respect, asked for your expertise in modernizing things? I thought about it. Yes, I would have shown you everything, taught you how it all worked, helped you make informed decisions, but you never asked. You just assumed you knew better. The most expensive assumption of my life. Probably. The contracts should be in your inbox now. Richard said as soon as you sign and return them, you can begin restoration. The engineering team is standing by. I checked my email. 3 documents: the new Lockheed license agreement, the consulting contract, and a separate document, a letter of commendation from the board, acknowledging my invaluable contributions to Vexton Dynamics and exceptional professionalism during the recent crisis. I see them. Then I guess this is goodbye. Again, but properly this time. Ethan, I said, surprising myself, a word of advice? Please. Your next role, whatever it is, listen first. The people doing the work usually know more than the people managing them. I'll remember that. Thank you, Madeline, for the lesson, even if it cost me everything. He hung up. I looked at the contracts, then at the admin panel still showing red across the board. With a few keystrokes, I could restore everything. The nightmare would end, systems would revive, and Vexton would slowly rebuild. But first, I read every line of each contract. Details matter. Ethan had learned that lesson too late. At 5:30 p.m., with the contracts signed and returned, I opened the Lockheed control system. My fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced precision, entering commands I'd written years ago for a scenario I'd hoped would never come. One by one, the red lights turned green. The constellation began to breathe again. Within minutes, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Systems coming back online, you beautiful genius." Marcus followed. "The legend returns. Drinks on me for life." I closed my laptop and stood up. Stretching. Tomorrow, I'd begin my consulting engagement. 6 months of documentation, knowledge transfer, and training. But tonight, I had dinner plans with David Vexton to discuss that new venture he'd mentioned. As I got ready, I thought about Ethan's question. Would I have helped if he'd asked? Yes, I would have. But sometimes, the best teaching moments come from letting people fail. The roses in my garden caught the last rays of sunlight. They'd survived neglect, just like I'd survived dismissal, and like them, I was ready to bloom again. The boardroom at Vexton Dynamics looked different from this side of the table. 9 a.m., Monday morning, and I sat where Ethan had once stood. But I wasn't standing. I was seated, comfortable, with my own legal counsel beside me and a coffee that I'd brought from my favorite cafe, not the burnt offerings from the break room. The entire board was present. Richard Blackstone at the head, looking like he'd aged 5 years in 5 days. Jennifer Walsh to his right, her CEO confidence noticeably shaken. The other 7 board members arranged around the mahogany table like soldiers who'd survived a catastrophic battle. "Ms. Ross," Richard began formally, "thank you for agreeing to meet in person." "I'm here as a consultant," I reminded them. "This is billable time." A few uncomfortable shifts. They weren't used to contractors setting terms. "Of course," Richard nodded. "Before we discuss the transition plan, the board wanted to address something directly." Jennifer leaned forward. "We owe you more than an apology. We owe you an explanation." "I'm listening." "When Ethan was hired," she continued, "he came with impressive credentials, McKenna Consulting, Harvard MBA, a track record of optimizing engineering departments. The board pushed for someone who could, in their words, bring fresh perspective." "Fresh perspective," I repeated. "Is that what we're calling it?" Richard grimaced. "We failed in our oversight. We allowed someone with no understanding of our technical infrastructure to make critical decisions. We prioritized appearance over substance." "You prioritized cost-cutting over competence," I corrected. Ethan's first proposal was to reduce the engineering budget by 30%. I saw the memo. Uncomfortable silence. They hadn't known I'd seen that. "The memo that suggested my position was redundant," I continued. That claimed the authentication system was mature enough to self-maintain. Tell me, how did that work out? It was a disaster, Jennifer admitted. We lost $43 million in direct revenue, another $100 million in contract penalties. Our market cap dropped by $2 billion. 3 major clients have terminated their relationships permanently. And that's just the financial cost, added Thomas Chen, the CFO. Our reputation may never fully recover. We're being used as a case study at Stanford's business school already. The professor called it the Icarus syndrome, flying too close to the sun of ego-driven management. I pulled out my laptop. Shall we discuss the transition plan? Please, Richard said quickly, clearly eager to move past their culpability. I opened my presentation. Locke's architecture is complex because it evolved with Vexton's needs. What started as simple authentication became the circulatory system of your entire operation. The first thing your team needs to understand is that this isn't just code. It's institutional knowledge encoded in algorithms. For the next hour, I walked them through systems they'd taken for granted: the authentication layers, the token management, the encryption protocols, the failover mechanisms. Their eyes glazed over at the technical details, but they forced themselves to pay attention. The cost of ignorance had been too high. The documentation I'm creating will be comprehensive, I continued. But documentation is not understanding. Your engineers need training, hands-on experience, and most importantly, respect for the complexity they're managing. What do you recommend? Jennifer asked. First, promote Sarah Kim to principal engineer. She has the best grasp of the system after me. Second, implement a proper knowledge management system. Not just a wiki, but recorded training sessions, architectural decision records, and regular system reviews. And third, Richard prompted, never again let someone without technical understanding make technical decisions. You wouldn't let an engineer perform surgery. Don't let MBAs architect software. The room was quiet. Then, surprisingly, Thomas Chen laughed. You know what the irony is? Ethan's severance package cost us more than your salary for the next 3 years would have. That's not irony, I said. That's stupidity. Richard cleared his throat. There's one more matter. The board has discussed, and we'd like to offer you the position of Chief Technology Officer. I'd expected this. No? The compensation would be… No, I repeated. I've been clear. I won't be an employee again. After my consulting contract ends, I'm starting my own firm. Authentication infrastructure for companies that understand its value. With David Vexton? Jennifer asked, a note of concern in her voice. Among others, don't worry, we won't compete directly with Vexton, your enterprise software. We'll focus on security infrastructure, different markets. But you'll take our knowledge. My knowledge, I corrected. Everything I learned here, I learned by doing, by building, by solving problems at 3 a.m. while executives slept. That knowledge was never yours. You just rented access to it. Another silence. Then Richard nodded slowly. Fair enough. We wish you success. I don't need your wishes, I said, closing my laptop. I have my expertise. As the meeting concluded and board members filed out, Jennifer lingered. Madeline, can I ask you something off the record? I nodded. When you walked out that day, did you plan all this? Or did you just know it would collapse without you? I knew the terms of the contract. I knew the consequences of my termination. But the plan? I smiled. The plan was yours. You pulled the trigger. I just didn't stop the bullet. She shook her head. In 20 years of being a CEO, this is the most expensive lesson I've learned. Then it was worth it, I said, gathering my things. Education always costs something. The only question is whether you learn from it. I left the boardroom and walked through the engineering floor. Developers looked up from their screens, some nodding respectfully, others actually applauding. Sarah ran over and hugged me. 6 months, she said. Learn everything I can in 6 months. You'll do fine, I assured her. You always had the capability. You just needed the opportunity. As I reached the elevator, someone called out, Madeline! I turned. It was Marcus, holding a cardboard box, the same type I'd carried out 6 days ago. This was Ethan's office. We're turning it into a server room. Found this on his desk. He handed me an envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. Madeline, they say the best revenge is success. You've achieved both. Thank you for the lesson. E.D. Peace. The roses in your garden look beautiful. Saw them when I drove by. Trying to work up courage to apologize in person. Never found it. Some of us lead, some follow, and some just get out of the way. I'm learning which one I am. I folded the note and put it in my pocket. 6 months of consulting ahead, then freedom. My own company, my own terms, my own future. The elevator doors opened. As they closed behind me, I heard Sarah addressing the team. All right, everyone, Madeline's going to teach us everything, and this time, we're going to listen. This time, they would. The cost of not listening had been too high, the lesson too painful, but that was their education to complete. Mine was just beginning. 6 months later, I stood in my new office, not a corporate cube farm, but a converted warehouse in Oakland with exposed brick walls and actual windows. The sign on the door read, Fortress Authentication Systems, with a smaller line below, Ross & Associates. David Vexton sat across from me, reviewing our latest client contract. At 71, he had the energy of someone half his age, revitalized by building something new without the weight of corporate bureaucracy. Japanese automotive manufacturer, he said, sliding the papers across. They want the full security suite. After watching Vexton's meltdown, everyone wants bulletproof authentication. Vexton's disaster was our best marketing campaign. I agreed, signing the contract. We didn't even need to advertise. My phone buzzed with a LinkedIn notification. Sarah Kim had posted, 1 year ago, I watched a brilliant engineer get terminated for no reason. Today, I'm principal engineer at Vexton, and she's running the hottest security startup in Silicon Valley. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying those who wronged you, it's building something they can never touch. Thank you at Madeline Ross for showing us the way. I smiled and kept scrolling. Another notification caught my eye. Ethan Drake had updated his profile. Adjunct Professor of Business Ethics, Sacramento State University, teaching course. The Cost of Hubris, a case study in leadership failure. David noticed my expression. What is it? Ethan's teaching now, business ethics. David laughed. The arsonist teaching fire safety, though I suppose he's qualified. He knows exactly what not to do. A knock on the door interrupted us. My assistant, yes, I had an assistant now, entered with a package. This came by courier, she said, marked urgent. The return address was Vexton Dynamics. Inside was their annual shareholder report and a handwritten note from Jennifer Walsh. Madeline, thought you should see page 47. Your consulting work saved us, but more importantly, it changed us. The board now requires technical assessment for all strategic decisions. Sarah has built an incredible team. We're different now, better. Thank you for the education. Expensive as it was, J. I flipped to page 47. There, in the Lessons Learned section, was a full-page analysis titled The Madeline Ross Incident, a case study in valuing technical expertise. The report detailed everything, the termination, the collapse, the recovery, but the last paragraph stood out. The crisis cost Vexton Dynamics over $200 million in direct losses and immeasurable reputational damage. However, it taught us an invaluable lesson. Technical infrastructure isn't just code and servers. It's the knowledge, experience, and dedication of the people who build and maintain it. When we terminated Madeline Ross, we didn't just lose an employee. We lost 12 years of institutional knowledge that nearly destroyed us. This will never happen again. I set the report aside and looked out my window. The San Francisco Bay sparkled in the afternoon sun. My garden roses, I'd brought cuttings to plant outside the office, were blooming brilliantly. Any regrets? David asked, following my gaze. None, I said honestly. They needed to learn. I needed to leave. Everything worked out as it should. My computer chimed with a video call request. 3 new clients wanting consultations, all referrals from companies who'd watched Vexton's near-death experience. Each one began the same way. We want to make sure we never have a single point of failure like Vexton did. But they did. They all did. Every company had their Madeline Ross, someone whose knowledge was critical, but whose value was invisible until they were gone. The smart ones would learn from Vexton's mistake. The others would learn the hard way. As the day wound down, I walked through our small but growing office. We had 12 employees now, all engineers who understood that code was poetry and systems were symphonies. No MBAs, no consultants from big firms, just people who built things and understood their value. The wall behind reception displayed a framed printout of Ethan's apology letter, a gift from Sarah on the day I incorporated Fortress. Below it, she'd added a plaque. Never forget, the person who maintains your foundation holds the keys to your kingdom. At 6 p.m., I locked the office and headed home. No urgent calls, no crisis to solve, no executives making uninformed decisions about systems they didn't understand. Just the satisfaction of building something properly, with respect for both the technology and the people who created it. My phone buzzed one last time. A text from an unknown number. Ms. Ross, starting my first engineering job tomorrow. Your story inspired me to learn to code instead of getting an MBA. Thank you for showing us that knowledge is power. But knowing your worth is everything. A grateful CS graduate. I smiled and put the phone away. In the end, the sweetest revenge wasn't destroying Vexton or humiliating Ethan. It was proving that expertise has value, that knowledge deserves respect, and that sometimes the best response to being undervalued isn't anger or sabotage. It's simply letting people face the consequences of their choices, then building something better from the ashes they leave behind. The sun set over the bay as I drove home, the exit papers that started everything now framed in my office as a reminder. Every ending is just a beginning in disguise. You just have to sign on the dotted line and walk away. And sometimes, taking the source code with you isn't theft. It's just taking back what was always yours. Thank you for listening to this story of revenge, redemption, and knowing your worth. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Have you ever experienced being undervalued at work? How did you handle it? Let's discuss in the comments below.